The people of Oregon voted to approve medical aid in dying in 1994, the first state to do so. Since then, 9 more states and the District of Columbia have followed suit, either by ballot initiative, court action, or law change. Representative Heather Edelson is the author of a bill that would add Minnesota to the list, allowing terminally ill adults who qualify the option to end their suffering. She joins me now in the studio. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Death with dignity, assisted suicide, the right to die, medical aid in dying are different ways of describing the End of Life Act. The bill that you're promoting, the measure would allow qualifying people 18 and older with a terminal diagnosis to request life-ending medication. Why should Minnesota move in this direction?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's going to be highly debated, I think, this session. We're really going to try to make a push. Families, I'm here as a legislator, as a clinical social worker, but as somebody that is really advocating for families, hearing from them that they want this option for their loved ones. So we're debating it because Minnesotans, if elected officials don't hear from the public, that's where the laws really come from. So families want to have this as an option, and we've seen 10 other states, as you said, plus the District of Columbia pass it, and I think it's a really important discussion to have here this session.
What are the circumstances then under which an individual would be allowed to choose this option if the bill were to become law?
So the circumstances there would have to be, there's 2 consulting physicians, and they would have to have a prognosis where the terminal illness is, the expectation is that they only have about 6 months to live. So, looking at that prognosis, overwhelming when you look at other states and the data, it's usually people that have cancer are the overwhelming numbers. I think it's 70% of the people that use this. 90% if you look in other states, 90% of people are in hospice care at that point. So this is one of the options, as you've probably already exhausted every other option. Most people, I think it's really important to remember, most people want to live. These are people that are actively dying. And so I think that's just something to really consider when we're having this debate.
Well, and I think it says in the bill that the person has to be able to self-administer the medication. So if it is someone then that is in hospice and has become too weak, or if it is someone with a disability that would somehow prevent them from being able to ingest the medication, then those people would not be allowed this option. Is that correct?
Well, so yes, there's a lot of, we're really working on right now the finalization of the language to make sure that we have as many protections as possible. We're engaging with the disability community, we're engaging with physician groups, really trying to make sure that we have the strongest bill possible for Minnesota. And if you look across the 10 states in the District of Columbia that have passed it, they all have slightly different versions. So what we want to make sure is that we have strong protections for people. So you, in our current draft right now, that you would be able to have somebody help you get the medicine ready, but the person would have to self-administer it. And so, yes, as of right now, if you cannot, say, put it in your IV, or if you cannot swallow the medication, then you would not be able to take this. There's also protections if the person doesn't have the cognitive capacity to understand what they're requesting. And meeting with 2 physicians is very intentional, making sure the person understands what they are asking, that they've exhausted other options. So this isn't the first line of treatment.
Yeah, it's further down the road. Earlier I mentioned that this process is sometimes referred to as assisted suicide, but I've also read numerous objections to that characterization. Why is suicide the wrong word to use?
We've been having a lot of discussions around that. As somebody that has worked as a therapist, when a person is suicidal, there are a lot of different factors that are happening. That person is usually not actively dying, though we have heard in other states where, you don't have this option, people become suicidal because of the pain. And so the difference here is one person is faced with this terminal illness. They want to live. People go through chemo, which can be very hard on your body. They go through these life-saving options because they want to live. It's not suicide at the end of life. I mean, when you think about this, what we're proposing here, it is an option for families. It is an option for the person that is really seeking to have, there's 3 things that people want at the end of their life, usually, and it's usually peace. They want to be surrounded by loved ones, and they want to ensure that they've really tried all things to live. And that's really what this bill is allowing you to do, is have some control over the end of your life.
Doctors do sometimes get prognoses wrong, and a 6-month diagnosis may not be accurate. Certainly there are anecdotal stories about people living well beyond a 6-month diagnosis. There's also many faith groups that are opposed to any kind of intervention at the end of life. So how do you reconcile these concerns?
Well, we've really made this, it's patient driven, so the patient gets to decide whether or not they want to participate. So if you're somebody that it doesn't match up with your religious or your values, your beliefs in that way, then you absolutely would not be somebody that would seek it. If you were a practitioner that says my values and my religious beliefs do not match up with this, you do not have to participate. So we make it very clear in the legislation that there is no punitive nor liability for the practitioner to participate, or actually even the institution. So if there's a larger clinic that says, you know, hey, we don't want to do this, or if it's a hospice that does not want to participate, they do not have to. There's no, it's not mandated to do this.
So a patient, if they are, say, in their healthcare provider, this is a choice that they want to make, they've reached the end of the line, their healthcare provider believes strongly that they don't want to participate in this, then that person would then have to, you know, shop around for somebody else that they could work with to go in this direction?
Yes, yeah, and so that can be, I mean, that's going to be something that the patient could face is obstacles to try to figure out what would be a practitioner that would be able to help. Mm-hmm.
The attending provider must determine, and you referred to this, that an individual's request is not arising from coercion or undue influence, and also that that individual's mental state is evaluated to make sure that they are of sound mind, and it is really truly their choice. But there are concerns also that healthcare facilities might encourage this option due to financial concerns. I mean, the costs at the end of life can be enormous, and if it's someone who doesn't have a lot of resources, what kind of protections will there be to ensure that this is 100% an individual's choice and it isn't family or financial or some other outside force trying to manipulate the situation?
That is such a great question, Shannon, and we're really making sure that the language is very clear, that it has to be the patient's choice. There can be no coercion, whether it's an insurance company or a larger clinic or a hospital setting or a hospice, to promote this for the patient. That should not be the case. It should be patient-driven, that it's something they want to see for themselves as an option for their end of life.
And so then on the death certificate, will it be clear that this was not suicide? What will be the cause of death on a death certificate?
The cause of death will be the underlying cause of death, which is, so say for instance, if it's pancreatic cancer, it will be pancreatic cancer. But that, you think about that, and I know there's some pushback there, but in the 11 other jurisdictions, this is true. But also think about this. When you're going through, say, you're having cancer and you decide to stop eating, and the VSED, voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. So you stop. At that point, we don't say that is suicide. We say the underlying cause of death, if it's pancreatic cancer, is pancreatic cancer. So I guess, what is the difference?
This is much discussion to come on this very important topic, and Representative Edelson, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shannon.